Good morning. My name is Greg. This is my 2007 Ford F-150. It's a King Ranch 5.4 four-wheel drive, and I have a busted coil over strut on my front driver's side that I'm going to be replacing today. The other thing I have noticed is a couple of months back going down the road, I actually had a new set of tires put on the vehicle, and I noticed a little bit of roar from the front end. And I've monitored that. At first I was thinking it was the tires, but I've noticed as I've tried to test it that when I turn to the right, the roar seems to go away, which makes me highly suspect that I have a front hub bearing that's going bad or getting ready to go out. So while I'm in there today, I'm going to do both coilover struts on the front, and I'm also going to replace both front hubs, complete assemblies with bearings. The ones I have come with the anti-lock brake cables and everything else. So let's get started. This is my legal disclaimer that this is my work and the way I do it. I am not a certified auto mechanic, and I do not endorse myself or anything that I'm showing you to do in terms of the proper techniques. If you're going to work on your own vehicles, you need to do ample research yourself to ensure that you're being safe and you're doing the work thoroughly with quality parts, so you're not endangering yourself or anyone else out on the road. I may throw out some torque specs or different things that I may use. I will try to avoid most of those things just to make you do your own research. Again, this is for me and my process and for you to view it, but you're responsible for yourself. Do your own research and be safe. Okay, so I'm going to start off giving you a shot of my replacement parts. These are Detroit axle coilover struts for the front, and these are my complete hub wheel bearing assemblies. As you'll see, there are the engagement teeth for the four-wheel driver on these. They come complete with the anti-lock brake cable assembly, so you can snap that in and out. But let me just talk about parts real quickly. Purchase quality parts. These parts here aren't top of the line, but they're certainly not the cheapest thing I can find. If you're going to do the work, you want to ensure that you're using good parts so you don't have to do the work over again. This is Duke. He's going to be joining me today. Duke stays right with us pretty much wherever we go, and he loves to ride in the pickup with the window down. So I'm sure he will be right under my feet. The green mat you see here is not for him. It's actually for me, for my knees, and also to keep our work area clean, neat, and organized. It just makes it so much less frustrating, and in the end, a little bit of prep time helps the job go so much easier. I'm gonna come over here to our tools real quick. This may look intimidating, but you're not gonna need all of these tools, actually very few of them. I've got a jack that's not in the picture here, jack stands, wheel chocks. We'll set the emergency brake, chock it, make sure we're safe here. And if you don't have all of these tools, just let me say that it's very wise to maybe invest in some. The tools pay for themselves over and over. So when you go to do a job, even air tools or whatever, in most cases, even if you're going to do a front brake job, you can buy the tools that you need to do it and do it right and still save probably half the price of what a mechanic's going to charge you. You do this a few times, first thing you know, you've got a pretty good set of what you're going to need to do anything. And the most important tool of all for me, a southern boy, a little bit removed at the moment, is a large glass of iced tea to keep us refreshed. So again, this is the pickup, 2007 Ford F-150. It's got about 176,000 miles on it, and we're going to give it a little bit of a makeover. Okay, so we've got a wheel chocks under the vehicle. Got my hubcap cover off, air impact ready to go. I'm going to start getting the vehicle off the ground here a little bit. Get it up and then pull the wheel off. Okay, so I've got my lug nuts off. I'm gonna pull the tire. As you can see, I zipped them off with my impact wrench. I've got my lug nuts here stored so I can use those later. So I'm gonna pull this tire off and get in there. And I think what I'll probably do is do the shock first and then the hub second. Front, and if you look, you can see it's broken. So what happens when that breaks is it allows the vehicle to sag down a little bit in the front end. It'll almost make the rear end right look high because the front end's dipping down. it'll also wear out your tires. And I have a new set of tires, so I want to prevent that. So what we're going to do is remove this tie rod in right here. We're going to soak it with a little penetrant. We'll zip that off, remove that tie rod. Then we're going to go up here to the top, and there are 3 bolts at the top we'll remove. I think those are 15 millimeter, but I'll have to verify that. And then finally, down at the bottom, there's a big adjoining nut. I think this is 1 1/16, and I believe the nut is 29 millimeters on the other side. We'll remove that, work that past the CV boot here, pull it out, and be able to replace this. These 2 we'll be able to get to fairly easy. There's one in the back here on the inside that we're probably going to have to get to, there you go, from the top. But I believe I can go in straight from my engine compartment and get to that one. Here we go. Okay, we've got a good shot here. I've removed my tie rod in. This is basically what controls your steering on your vehicle. It's a 21 millimeter, zipped it off on my impact wrench. One of the things I do want to show you is the nut. You see that little red nylon retainer? That actually helps lock this nut in place to hold your tie rod in place. It's strongly recommended that you buy new nuts with new retainers. Once you've taken this off, you can't reuse. You can reuse the nut with Loctite, I'm told. However, this locking mechanism is no longer being effective, so you'll have to use some other means of locking the nut into place. This is critical as it does control your steering, and all of this is serious in terms of safety. So please, if you're going to do this yourself, please consult a mechanic for all the proper torque settings, all the tips and tricks and things so you can do this safely. I'm not going to get into that because I don't endorse these things. I'm not a professional mechanic, and this is for myself, but it's just more of the process to go through, not the specifics. So anyway, I'm going to move this out of the way, and then I will probably loosen up my bottom bolt a little bit without removing it. Then I'll start on my upper bolts here. Okay, so I've got my tie rod in, pulled out of the way. You can use a bungee cord for that. I've actually loosened these 2 15 millimeter nuts, and I'm going to suggest for that I invested for this job in a ratchet wrench, which was very, very helpful. One of the most frustrating things when you're doing work at home is not having the right wrench. You run out of space, you can bust knuckles, all of those kinds of things. So you know, there's different offset wrenches, all kind of little special tools. And what I mainly suggest is do your homework. Watch videos on YouTube, Google, where mechanics have done this, and a lot of times they'll give you a little trick for a specific tool you need. These are loose now. I'm going to go up inside my engine compartment, and as you can see, that's the remaining one, and I'm just going to reach it here from inside with an extension and my air ratchet, and I'll remove that. I will leave one in place so that the shock holds in place when I remove the lower. Okay, so I've removed the inner 15 millimeter nut. Again, these have the locking nylon inserts. I am going to leave one of these in place. I'll remove the lowers. And what I would like to point out is on the shocks that I have purchased, they actually come with new replacement nuts. So I will not reuse these. Now I'm gonna get the rest of the bolts off and we'll try to get the shock out. The advantage of having a ratchet wrench, it's just amazing how much quicker this makes this. And when it's easier, it's more enjoyable, and you're more likely to do it and do it right. So I'm gonna get that one out of there. Almost. There we go. So that one's off. And basically the way this works is, so I put it on upside down now. So if I were to push this against the tension, it would be tightening it. So basically I want to just flip it over, seat it on there, and then I'll pull it back. Now I'm not going to take it off. I just want it loose because it has to hold this entire assembly, and otherwise when I'm trying to take the bottom out, it would fall on me or fall out and or add weight that could create a pinch point. So this is more for safety at this point. Okay, next down here to the bottom, I've got my 1/16 inch nut, that's a bolt, and then my nut is on the other side, which I've soaked. I'm going to wire brush, and I'm going to try to zip that off. I believe that is 29 millimeters with my impact wrench. Okay, so a couple of notes here about a couple of things. I've got my wrench, 1/16 inch. As you see, I've wet this down and lubricated it. I won't do that when I put my new strut in, because there is a rubber insert grommet bushing in here, and you don't want to damage that. You also don't want to put anything on it that could deteriorate that, and some lubricants can tear down certain composites of plastics and things that bushings and such are made of. So the other thing I can see here from the back, once you remove this tie rod in, your knuckle here is going to swing freely back and forth, and you can use that to your advantage to gain additional access to what you need to work on. As you can see, I've wire brushed this nut now. I have sprayed it down as well, and that's important because you want to make certain you have a really good fit on your socket. You don't want to damage that bolt head, and if you get debris and stuff in there, it can cause you to force it or have a tough time getting the nut out of the socket. So just make sure it's clean. I'm going to zip this off now. Okay, I just took that off. I have to work to get the nut out of here. Again, it's pretty tight. I'll do that off screen. But it came out pretty easy, mainly because I cleaned it up, took my time, and did it right. I'm going to now tap this bolt through. You don't want to damage the threads, so I'm going to tap it on the end. As you can see, the bore of the bolt's a little smaller than the threads. You don't want to mushroom this, and I've got a punch that I'll use to knock it the rest of the way through. Okay, so I've got this bolt mostly out. I'm going to be careful pulling it out. I don't want to mess up the threads. I may have to pry on it a little bit with a pry bar to get that out. Okay, so I've just got a flat tip pry bar here. I'm going to insert it in. I might have to put the phone down that I'm filming on, but as you can see, as I lift up, the bolt basically loosens up because you're correcting the tin line, and then out it comes. Threads are in good shape. Put that aside, and then I'll start working the shock out of here. Now, the way I'm going to attempt to do this, as I have seen, is a little bit of a not a shortcut, but it saves you a lot of work, is to slowly work the bottom of the strut out of the housing. And you can see better. The pinch point's going to come with a CV boot. So I'm going to have to work this knuckle on this front hub back and forth and slowly work that out. So I'm going to do that now. And of course, before I do that, I'm going to remove this last nut so it is free to move. And then I'll begin working the shock out. Okay, so as you can see, I've basically worked my shock out of the saddle, and I'll have to clean this up. But now I'm going to straighten out my hub here, and then as I do, the CV knuckle will move in and it'll allow me to clear this without taking all of this assembly, this front A-arm apart. You don't want to damage your boot here. So I'll straighten that up and work it out. Okay, that took me about half a second. I'm past my CV boot. It's in good shape, and my shock is now free. It should work out here. My bolts are up. There we go. And we've now removed it. Okay, I just want to point out this was the broken strut that came out of the vehicle. This piece right here has snapped. It's normally attached here. So the lifting power of this spring is gone from the vehicle, and that can cause all kinds of problems, primarily tire wear. But if in fact I do have a bearing going out, it's possible that this could be the culprit, that I've waited too long to change this. Okay, my next step here is I'm going to clean up my mounting surfaces, get rid of any and all debris in there, Same thing with my tie rod end. Looks pretty good. Tighten up there. And same thing, I'll work the back side of this, and we're going to start putting the shock back in. Okay, these are 2 of my 3 nuts. They don't have the locking inserts in them, so I'm going to hit them with Loctite just to hold them in place. I'm going to do that now. And what I'm using is not Loctite, it's a thread locker, excuse me, and this is a medium strength, as recommended by one of the other mechanics that I checked with. Okay, so I've got 1 nut in place. What I'm going to do now is work the bottom into place and just put my retaining bolt back through it. Then I will torque up the top. And please look these torque value settings up for yourself. I don't want to be liable for that. I'll torque these down. And then I've heard told that you don't want to torque this bottom nut down until you have the full weight of the vehicle on it, which I'll put the jack back under it and raise this lower control arm up and put it back together that way. Okay, we're going to back together pretty well here, and as you can see, I've got my shock now going in my lower arm and retaining slot, so I'm just going to work that in very carefully here with my pry bar, ensuring that I'm not going to damage my boot or my bushing. Okay, so I've got my lower retaining bolt back in. The thing that you have to be very careful of here is the toughest part's getting the lower knuckle aligned with both mounting surfaces on either side. So just take your time and make certain you don't damage your threads. We should be good to go here. I'm going to put the nut on the other side. I will not torque it down, but I'm going to tighten it up. Then I will move up top and tighten down my upper bolts. Okay, now I've got my bolt back on. It's not totally tightened down. I'll tighten up the top. Then I'm going to put a jack stand, or I may let the vehicle rest on this jack stand itself, remove my jack, and then lift up on this A-arm until it's totally supporting the vehicle, and then I'll torque down my lower bolt. Okay, I'm preparing to tighten down my large retaining bolt on the bottom. I have now rested the vehicle on my jack stands. I have 2 of them. They are 3-ton capacity. I'm going to use my jack here to lift up on my lower arm until the vehicle is lifted or resting, and that will ensure me that the weight of the vehicle is now suspended on the shock and I can tighten and torque this up. I think the only reason this is suggested is to not damage the internal bushing on the lower retaining hole of the strut, but I'm going to do it just for good measure. Okay, we are complete with the shock installation with the exception of the tie rod end and replacing the wheel. However, since we are going to replace the wheel bearing hub assembly, I have left the tie rod end loose. And now I'm going to go in, I'm going to remove my brake caliper, set that back up out of the way, and slowly start removing the hub. And just one last time, this is our new coilover strut installed as it should be. Hopefully we get a lot of service out of that. So the tie rod end is still off. What I need to do now is I'll remove this outer cap, and there is a nut in there that I'll need to loosen to remove the brake caliper. Before I do that, I will remove my brakes. Excuse me, my brake caliper, remove that, and then remove the disc to get to the hub assembly. Okay, so I have removed both the outer dust cover cap for my center hub bolt. I have removed my brake caliper totally. There's 2 bolts. I believe they were 18 millimeters. Take that off, and I've suspended it up above my upper suspension to keep it out of the way. So tie rod's still out of the way. Next thing I'm going to do is remove the center bolt, loosen that up, and it looks like it's a 13 millimeter. So I'll do that, and then I'll start tapping my disc for my brakes off to access the hub. So this is coming along pretty well. This was not torqued very much at all. I'll have to check the spec when I put it back. There we go. clean. That bearing right there looks okay, so we'll pull it off and see what we're looking at. Okay, so here we are. Actually, once you take your, I should have left the nut on here so this wouldn't move around. But basically, your disc free floats on your hub, so it should pull right off, just like that. So this is your brakes, and when people talk about turning your rotors when you do a brake job, basically they're machining this top surface here. If you drive a lot in mountains, or you get a lot of heat on your brakes, or you ride your brakes a lot, they'll heat up and cool, and this will warp, and that'll make your vehicle kind of shake or shimmy when you're putting on your brakes. So it's important to keep that cool. Another tip, we live in the mountains, so we do a lot of mountain driving, and when you're going downhill, I prefer to put it in a lower gear and let the engine brake versus wearing out your brakes. These look good, so they require no rework. We'll put that to the side. And here we go. This is what we're replacing today, and it's held on by 4 bolts that you can kind of see here. I'll try to get a little better light, and they actually come in from the back side. But we'll take those off, and we should be able to free this up. The other thing I have done is I have taken some pictures of the routing of the lines that go to the hub and to the brake line to the caliper itself. Those will all need to be secured to ensure you don't pinch them when this goes back together. Okay, I've now accessed the hub itself. It is held on in the back by 4 18mm bolts, and this is our anti-lock braking system line. So we're going to move that out of the way. You don't need so much to be concerned with this one. I've already disconnected at the top, but I'm going to access here to show you these bolts. So on the back, there are 4 18mm bolts right there, 2 on either side. We're going to take this off, we'll inspect it, and we'll clean it up really good before we put the new one on. So once again, air tools just make all the difference in the world. You can zip the bolts out. These are 18mm bolt heads. And now on the front here, on my hub, it's a little nasty. What I'm going to do is take and pry in here, and this should come right out. Okay, so you can see I just wrapped on this lightly with about a 2.5 pound hammer sledge, just tapped it, and it's starting to loosen up. So I'm just going to work this hub on out. Okay, this is my hub that I've now removed. It's a little dirty, but on face value, you can't really see, much of any issues. However, if I go and I start looking at my axle shaft, you see that discolored portion? That's actually where my bearing has started to wear into my axle shaft there. It's, in a perfect world, I would probably replace this. It's discolored, but I think I can clean it up pretty well and be fine. So I'm gonna get some steel wool to that, clean it up a little bit before I reinstall my new bearing. The other thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to stuff a rag in here so I don't get any sand into my internal gears. So those teeth that you see in there are actually what turn the front wheel when you're in 4-wheel drive. And I'll put new grease in there, but I certainly want to clean that out and protect it from any sand or dust while I'm cleaning this up. Okay, so basically what I'm doing is I've protected the gears inside, cleaned it up a little bit. I'm taking my surface grinder here. I'm just going to knock off any dirt, rust, debris buildup, because I want a really good seal, and I don't want any kind of dirt or mud or anything, any sand getting back into this bearing surface and these gears. So I'm going to clean this up. I'll remove my little rag there I've used to protect that, and then I'm going to put a little coating of high temp grease in here to lube it up before we go back together with the new part. Okay, this is my new hub bearing assembly, and I have cleaned up my axle. I've cleaned out the grease, cleaned it up really good, the surfaces. I'm going to slide this back on, put one nut in it to hold it together, and then we'll start tightening it down. And probably been a little more liberal with the grease. I think I'll clean a little bit of that up before I put put it in there. Hopefully we'll get a lot of mileage out of it. Okay, here we are. We have our new shock installed. And I now have the new hub installed and torqued down. I am going to hook up my anti-lock brake cable, and then I will replace my caliper. The last thing I'm going to do here, I need to put a little bit of grease in that internal bearing. I'll put my retaining nut and my dust cap back on. And we should be finishing this thing up. In terms of this, we need to replace, lock and torque our tie rod in, and then we should be good to go. Okay, and as you can see, I have my retaining nut back in, my dust cover cap back on. I've replaced the rotor. I'm preparing to put my caliper back on the rotor, and I've put one lug nut on to basically hold my caliper steady and in place. It'll move around a little bit, but that will assist me. Now, I may need to compress the cylinder, the brake cylinder, to get it back on. And if you need to do that, you'll need to remove the cap from your brake fluid reservoir. To do that, you may need a C-clamp. I'm going to try it without it. Okay, so brake caliper's back on. Rotor, everything's torqued and tight. Our last step here is we need to thread our tie rod in back together. Just goes together pretty well. It's going to hold. And I've got my nut. I'm going to put some thread locker on it, and then I will torque that down. Okay, I just want to summarize what we've done. You can see I've got my tie rod in back together, thread lock on it. It is torqued down to the proper spec. We have replaced our coilover strut in its entirety. Everything's torqued. We've replaced our inner hub and bearing. Hi, this is Greg, and as you can see, I've got the truck down now off of the jack, and we've completed the driver's side. At least I'm about 3 hours into it. Part of that was set up, pulling things out, and making sure I could kind of work efficiently. As you can kind of see here behind me, all the tools that I need I now have laid out, so I can take my mat and I'll drag it to the other side and start going on that. Some good college football on today, so I'll probably take a little break. But the next thing I'll do is go for a test drive when I'm completed, make sure everything's solid and tight, and then I'll probably go in for an alignment and ensure that the front end's tracking as it should, so I won't wear out any tires. Anyway, that's kind of my process in trying to do this work, and I hope it gives you confidence to try to do some things yourself. I am going to estimate that I probably have about $350 in parts. So you can figure that I probably would have been charged $700 plus shop supplies, $758 with tax, double that. What I'm going to do here today in about 5 hours is probably about a $1,600 job if I took it to a shop. Anyway, go for it. Just be careful. Make sure you know. Be safe. And make sure you have some people you can ask to ensure that when you put your vehicle back together, it's going to be safe. You don't want to have any issues going down the road either with yourself or your family or endanger anyone else. So anyway, take care. Have a good day.